When I say the word Marxism, most of us instinctively cringe. The term comes from Karl Marx, the 19th century philosopher and economist whose ideas became the foundation of communism and its dream of a classless society. Sounds nice in theory, but in practice, it leads to corruption, control, and chaos. So how does this tie into unions? You might be surprised, or not surprised at all, to learn that many of today's public unions trace their roots back to Marxist principles. So let's dive in. My name is Siena Rose, this is the new Frontline, and let's dive into Karl Marx, mayhem, and modern unions. The background of Karl Marx and his personage is that he lived in the 1800s in Germany and was a philosopher, economist, and revolutionary socialist whose philosophies and ideas laid the groundwork for what is now socialism and communism. He is best known for co-authoring the Communist Manifesto with Friedrich Engels, which, among other things, it calls upon the working class to rise up against the bourgeoisie. And I wish that explaining all of this was that simple, but it never is. When Marxism became an ideology, there were people who essentially agreed with his ideas, but disagreed with the way he wanted to do things. These people, amazingly, believed that he wasn't radical enough and thought things needed to be taken a step further. So thus was born this newer, more radical, but still Marxist-based concept called syndicalism. Syndicalism, if you don't know anything about it, you can Google the definition. I encourage you to do so. But the basic understanding is that syndicalism is an ideology that encourages both industry and government control achieved through revolutionary actions, including specifically violence. The syndicalist movement is very socialist and very Marxist, despite any of the culture's debates on the matter. The reason why we can squarely point to syndicalism as being Marxist is because Marxism pushes for revolting against the upper class to intentionally control and dissolve social class to make everyone equal. Unions became a mode of organizing against the bourgeoisie, and syndicalism, if you look up the definition like I just told you to, it's defined as a movement for transferring the ownership and control of the means of production and distribution to workers' unions, specifically organized during French workers' unions, heavily influenced by a guy named George Sorel, which I'll talk about more in a second. But basically, unions became that mode of organizing against the bourgeoisie, which is mainly comical because Marx was really against unions to begin with. And syndicalism then, when it was introduced, became the go-to ideology for unions to justify why they might need more and more control. So the similar union narrative that this reminds me of that we hear all the time in modern day culture is this idea that we have to band together, collective bargaining, we have to band together to rise up against those in power, we have to fight the man, we have to make things equal. And doing those things often inherently is done through revolutionary action or movement. Does this sound familiar yet? And going back to what I just said about this guy named George Sorel. So Marxism during that time, gaining recognition, gaining popularity, then enters this guy, George Sorel, who realizes that Marxist mythology is simply not enough to convince people to be violent. Also, simply saying things like rich people bad, which we would now translate to eat the rich, isn't enough to convince people to be violent either. He realized that people needed something much more personal and relatable than Marx's mythology to motivate them to act in a way that was contrary to their nature, aka convince them to act in a way that produced uninhibited violence, which is against all of our human nature. Many of us are not prone to violence. And Sorel realized that to be able to motivate people to be more violent, to produce revolutionary action, it needed to be a much more intrinsic and relatable issue that people would grab onto. So Sorel goes on to formulate this thing called national syndicalism, which is syndicalism mixed with integral nationalism. Again, a lot of big words here. Please feel free to Google, but I'm trying to give you the overview of these terms the best I can to help illustrate the point and how this relates to modern day unions. So a lot of big words, stick with me. I promise this has a good point. But instead of telling people about Marx, Sorel and his team, I should say, they go around and tell people how participating in violent protests and strikes with your union is actually for the good of the country. He believed that hate should be targeted at more than just the rich. It should be targeted at whomever the union decides is most convenient. I mean, how scary is that? As a result of this philosophy and how it's trickled down into modern day culture, I can point at darn near any union leader and call them syndicalists and be entirely truthful and accurate in doing so. Most of them honestly have no idea that this is the brand of socialist that they are, but it's the most apt categorization. Sorel's national syndicalism was also well beloved by anarchists of the day, many of whom were very anti-Semitic. So the parallels between present-day anti-Semitic union leaders like Becky Pringle of the National Education Association and Sorel-era anarchists are unnervingly plain. While Pringle and other union leaders like Randy Weingarten and Lee Saunders will deny it, the framework they run their unions on is directly inspired by George Sorel himself. It's modernized to be relevant to today's issues, but the framework is very much the same. It's lies, deceit, violence, hate, bullying, and a slew of totalitarian principles. We know that even today, union leaders and their unions will use simply anything in their ability to empower and mobilize their union members to set their scopes on the things that are most radical and convenient in order to get the change that they want. A few examples that I wanted to focus on, and I'll try and explain them as I go. But transgenderism in schools is a big one. Confusing children with this transgender ideology and even getting them to hide it from their parents if needed. That's a direct attack on the home, on the family, and it's incredibly convenient for unions to focus on because it separates children from their families and it puts the children squarely in the camp of the union's control. So convenient and radical. It hits both the points. Peaceful protesting, being ready to show up to contribute to quote-unquote peaceful protests, which is very convenient because then they're able to loot and destroy innocent stores. Very radical, very convenient for them to jump on that bandwagon. Something I mention in simply every episode now is the rampant anti-Semitism. The Jews, which they now use synonymously with Zionist, are contributing to evil Israelis attacking Palestinians. And they do this and they conveniently hide the fact that Palestinian terrorists are taking hostages, both Jewish and Arabic, and are doing horrible things to them. And the war is mainly a defensive one for Israel, but it's a convenient and radical thing for them to jump on that gets more people in their corner. Also, being the world's nastiest bullies, unions are some of the worst bullies I've ever seen. They bully everyone, including teachers and parents who may push back the tiniest bit, but they bully them relentlessly because the unions cannot allow anyone who does not blindly accept what the unions say or do. And this is incredibly concerning, and it's very readily apparent. And George Sorel, a man who is as notorious and complex as they come, would have absolutely loved this. He would have freaking loved it. He advocated for trade unions to be as powerful as possible, to be able to run a society under a totalitarian regime, no matter the cost of gaining that power to run that regime. I truly believe that the people, the leaders at the head of these massive government labor unions, have completely lost sight of how destructive their agenda really is. If we can agree that no one should have total control over a state or a country, how do unions justify themselves as being the one exception to this rule? Whether any of us realize it or not, even in a union, there is one person at the top, and that person will do whatever it takes for them to get the power that they think they deserve. We can even bring fascism into this too. Fascist and totalitarian regimes came about from thinking that a true, quote, true socialist revolution would come from unions doing whatever it took to get the power and control of the government they needed so that they could tell people what to do. Even the fascist logo, which is the fasces, was inspired by the idea that these different groups, consisting mostly and explicitly of unions, would come together to hold the blade, which represents violence inherently. So to say that unions would want to work peacefully or even efficiently is simply not true. It is such a fool's errand to believe that. There is no such thing when it comes to a union. There is no such thing as a peaceful protest. Everything they do and everything they want is based in sacrificing anything it takes to get to power. That's at the fundamentals of what this is. Unions will do anything. We see them employ these principles even in modern day, but everything they do is based in whatever it takes to get to power and focusing their hate and their vitriol on whatever is most convenient in order to get these radicalist principles and to get their radical ideology and their agenda moving forward. They do this in a way that entirely replicates the thinking and the actions of totalitarian dictators from all across history. The main point here that we need to drive home is that history is repeating itself in an incredibly dangerous way. The biggest government unions, such as the NEA, the AFT, AFSCME, the Teamsters, SEIU, and even more than that, use lobbying and political power and funding to control the government. So it's one of two things: government control. Union leaders also employ, again, that totalitarian, no nonsense, no resistance allowed style of governance to bully, ridicule, and take away the voice of anyone who doesn't follow the union's agenda or who even mildly questions it. So they're looking for industry control. That's the other thing. Government control and industry control. And just like dictators of the past, in one of the most harrowing examples, They see schools and children as tools to secure loyalty to their cause. They know that if you can get a child to believe something and to become fully indoctrinated into the beliefs that you're perpetuating, they're going to be more likely to be even the next wave of radicalization to further the agenda that you want them to further. If you can secure a child's mind, you have them for the rest of their life. And you have them because they don't know any better, because they've been indoctrinated into this since they were young. So they simply don't know any better. And therefore, they are tools to further the cause. And I mean, a 2-minute Google search will show you that this is true. Unions shape curriculum, they pour millions into politics, and they simply crush anyone who resists. They're not just bullies. They are the nastiest, most dangerous people in the country. Now is the time in America's history where we really need to start paying attention to what on earth is going on with government unions. Their origins and their beliefs are intertwined with some of the worst people in history. And as they continue to rise to power, this communist totalitarian regime becomes less like a joke and more like a harrowing reality. This is a fight we cannot afford to lose. It's the fight for our nation, for our future, and it goes on every single day. Let me tell you, unions are playing dirty in this battle. They are playing absolutely nasty. And it's important to recognize that, recognize what is really going on, recognize the implications of their agenda and what they're doing, and be intent in stopping it in its tracks. Please consider donating to Freedom Foundation today, or go to optouttoday.com if you're in a union and you want to opt out. Be educated, ask questions, do the research, and make sure that you are in the know about what is going on, what your union stands for, what they're promoting in curriculum, in politics, what they're putting your money behind, your dues money. It's really insidious, and knowing the implications of what is going on and being educated is one of the most important things. So please feel free, share what Freedom Foundation is doing, donate to us. We would love to have you join our fight. Ensure at the end of the day that your freedom remains yours and that you are able to protect the future of America through protecting your freedoms. Thanks for joining me here at the Frontlines. My name is Siena Rose, and I will see you next time.